Good luck with that. He didn't hit nobody back then. And nobody was allowed to hit him either, so. Yeah, I kinda expected that. I don't know. He was never like that when he was younger. He was kinda.
Stick his nose
Did
in.
your son play against him?
He played with him. We were on the same
Oh,
team.
coach, he was on your
Yeah.
team? Oh, really?
Yeah, we had Dylan Edwards and Avery and, we had LJ,
What was
Phillips.
Avery's dad like back then?
same as you. The
Alright,
reason why we weren't on the team no more.
Yeah.
time to pick work. Welcome, it is now 6:03 and I am resuming our meeting from 2/26/26. We welcome Trevor from PEC for the Sanitary Sewer and Water Master Plan Workshop. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you. All right, yeah, I'm Trevor Kaufman. So PEC completed the sewer and water master plans back in the end of 2023. We did do a presentation kind of following that wrap up. So this is similar, basically the same PowerPoint. I did make a slight modification, but we're gonna kind of run back through it, kind of get everyone back up to speed on what the findings of those reports were. So just real quick, a little background of what water and sewer master plans are. So very generically, it's basically identifying any system deficiencies and any system improvements needed to support 20 years of growth. I mean, that's the very basic way to look at it. So making sure everything's good now and then what is needed to support 20 years of growth. 20 years is a typical planning period. I'm going to talk about what the growth areas that were assumed for the plan were. It's challenging, I guess, to say whether the growth areas represent 20 years or not. That's definitely a challenge. So, but that's kind of the overview. Water system obviously dives into looking at system pressures, available fire flows, how the system operates, how it cycles throughout the day, fire hydrant coverage, pipe velocities, things like that. Sewer system focuses more really on your peak flow rate, so the max flow that ends up in the pipes. Sewer is much more focused on peak because it's usually a gravity system, and the gravity system has to convey the highest flow or it backs up. Water is a little different in that we look at more of average day and max day, and then we have what's called peak hour demands. Touch base on that a little more. So when we started kind of looking through, the first thing we always do is kind of evaluate the existing flows. So at the time this was completed, we had through 2022 data. This is the sewer flows. A couple things to note looking at this guy. So the average flow rate is about 0.128 million gallons a day. When we look into sewer, we're more concerned with our peaks. So when we went back through the data, and with sewer, there's things what you call dry weather, wet weather, meaning was it raining that day, was it not? With sewer systems, it's called II, inflow and infiltration. Some rainwater ends up in the sewer system. So rain can contribute to higher peaks. Obviously sewer maintenance, aging of sewer, things like that contribute to the amount of I that may be happening in the system. One thing to note that this was, Thomas and I spent a lot of time, trying to look into where this cause could be. There's a peak wet weather flow rate by hour was 0.942, so very, very high. We really only saw like one or two instances that flow ever read, and it was for a very, very short duration. More so that peak wet weather by day, the 0.391, which is about 3 times your average, that's more typical of a peak rate that we kind of see and expect. So when we did this evaluation, we were kind of really looking at that peak wet weather flow rate by day, not looking at that, instantaneous time. With that being said, if there's something in the system that is causing that instantaneous, trying to find that and stop that obviously is an important thing.
Do we, Trevor, real quick, and for you and Thomas both, do we have any new numbers since we did the repairs, the critical repairs?
Wayne,
I haven't looked at new numbers, but, I mean, the city would have them. I don't know, Thomas, do you know if you've
You
seen?
could get those, Thomas
pieces
keeps
high?
track of all that.
Yeah, they have gone down in the last two years, our flow rates and, the amount of time that the pump's running at the lift station is significantly down with those upgrades. that we
Since
made.
those
Oh, yeah.
were put in place, good.
Yeah, I had the numbers back there. I know I was checking over them the other day, but we keep all those sewer flows. We take them monthly since we've had all that done.
Yeah.
Nothing like we were seeing before, so.
Good.
Yeah, we did the big rehab project, CIPP, and then, I can't remember, did you guys end up doing something near that box? Where the sewer crossed that drainage box, or is that?
In Northwoods?
So, yes, yeah, we ended up doing, they ended up, there was some kind of sag there.
Yeah.
So we couldn't tell, so we had to come in and build that back up and get that to running in between those 2 points.
Yeah.
And then, obviously we went through and lined all the clay,
Yeah.
that there was, and then fixed all those manholes and relined those manholes, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so hopefully there has been significant improvement in those peak numbers since then. So, I will say KDHE assumption two is to use a peaking factor of 3. If you have true data, you can kind of counteract that, but with any new growth, there's an assumed peak factor of 3. So that 0.391 compared to the 0.128 fits well for what KDHE assumption is as well. So when this was completed, that was kind of where the numbers we were utilizing ran with.
I have a question on that last one.
Yes.
just To understand. So on the peak wet weather flow rate by day, it's the 391,000, but by hour, it's 942.
Yeah.
What does,
So so when we say by hour, it's an equivalent rate. So the reality is if the volume of water in that 1 hour, if that volume continued all day,
That's
it would be
okay.
942. Yeah, it's really 1/24 of that is what was
Okay.
seen in that 1 hour. Yeah. It's an easier way to
Okay.
compare them by
Well,
keeping them in.
I expected it to be less for a
Yes,
than
you are-
it is
you
for
are
a day,
correct.
so that
Yes,
was-
you are
that's
correct.
what I know. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So we did the same thing for water, looked at the last, almost 7, 8 years when we did this. Average was 0.15, slightly higher than your average wastewater, which makes sense, because a little bit of the water gets consumed versus what gets returned, when you look at it from an average. So, 0.15, we did at the time take a look at the top water users. Meter engineers was the highest at 3.6%, so, not huge impact on the system, but, that was the biggest user. So 0.15 is kind of the number to keep in mind. So the development area, so this is where kind of the backbone of what a master plan turns into is the determination of these. So a lot of this at the time was discussions with Tammy, about what was realistic and what was the goals of city growth. It's, when you look at it from a land area compared to the existing system, it's very, very large. So I definitely want to draw attention to that. And then, area-wise, there's the green kind of represent residential, red represent commercial, and then there's some industrial, and then there's some larger residential. So these areas were what we came up with and with Tammy's guidance, looking at some comp plan stuff, previous master plans. Generally, I think the mentality then was the idea of trying to capture 254 growth, to the east. I mean, I think that was what a lot of the mentality was. 2 years ago, there was a lot of discussions of, Tegra, CHIP, who they may be bringing in, all of the development that they could spur. So that was kind of played into this a little bit too. The type of use, when we look at projections, residential is a lower use per acre, commercial is higher, industrial is higher. So the assumed type of land use also makes a big difference in what the water and sewer projections are going to be. So when you look at this, it's just kind of look at the existing limits of the city system and then compare it to how much area, and it's significant amount. So what that's gonna do is it results in significant water and sewer improvements needed with the idea of supporting this much growth. So from that, we take each area and we come up with the individual flow rates. So again, this is utilizing KDHE assumptions. The reason we use KDHE assumptions is every time, especially the sewer system is expanded, you have to submit a permit to them, and then the permitting and calculations that you use are generally KDHE assumptions. Like I said, they will accept variation from that if you can prove it, but more generally, you submit there. So we stick with that here to meet that. We tend to find it too conservative. Long term, we tend to find that KDHE's values are higher than what we end up seeing. So they tend to be a little more conservative than usually what it ends up. But because of how the permitting and stuff works, we stick with kind of their projections. So anyway, their flows were developed for each growth area. So with that, we then put together our projected demands for both water and sewer. The water on the left, we did the water in two methods. One is we took the growth areas and then divided them over the 20 years for a constant growth rate and came up with what the incremental demands would be every 5 years. And then we also looked at it like a scenario based, and essentially scenario 1 was growth areas A and B, flip back, with growth areas A and B at the time, which represented 320 acres of residential growth. When this was done, that decision was made that just those seemed like the most likely properties to develop soon. So they were pulled separate. It also allowed more of a staged or phased scenario of, what's it look like if the goal is really to get that residential growth versus the big picture commercial growth that across 254. So phase 1 was A and B. So you can see that average days of cumulative ADD is average day demand. The bottom left, so 0.15 was the existing demand. That 320 acres of residential would triple the overall water demand of the system and get you up to 0.46. So again, that's a big magnitude just to look at those residential. So again, when you guys talk about goals growth and, obviously the more the goal expands, it becomes very exponential of what that demand is needed for water and sewer, and ultimately the improvements and the cost and everything that comes with that to make the system work. You go on to scenario 2, which is all of it, and it jumps all the way up to 3 million gallons. So going from 0.15 to 3 million gallons average day. So huge increase.
What areas was scenario 2?
That's all of them.
Oh,
That's
so
all of
that's-
them combined. Yep.
Everything.
Yep. So yeah, and you'll see that 2043 up above matches scenario 2. So looking at it again versus scenario versus if it was steady growth. And then wastewater is very similar. It's just shown as steady growth though. Gets up to 2.96. It's very similar. You will know that, the percent annual growth, when you look at these, if you were going to assume this is over 20 years, it's a 17% growth rate, which is huge. So most cities plan for 1%, 2%, is a little more typical of a growth. But there's a lot of stuff happening in the area, so there's factors that could certainly push that. So diving a little more into the sewer system. So this is the existing sewer system, and when we evaluate it, we break it up into basins, which is common pipes that basically flow ends up into. We broke it up into 5 main basins. Basin 1 being on the very south end, that is the entire city's flow ends up in that one pipe. The system currently discharges to the city of Wichita at the south end of that, and the city of Wichita takes all of the wastewater flow. Important thing to note there is that since all of it ends up in one pipe, that ultimately right now serves as the ultimate restriction of the system. The the max rate that pipe is the current restriction, and then even in the city of Wichita's system, they have pipes, sizes and slopes that control the flow rate, so they have limitations.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Thomas knows. What is the max that Wichita can receive from us, even if we were to upgrade that, outflow? Do we have a restriction on the Wichita side, or do you, either one of you know?
Yes, it is. So it's an 18-inch pipe too, so we're restricted by that. And I don't know the flow rate. I will get into, I know how much more we can put into it. I don't know what the upper limit is on top of my head. I did look at Wichita's system too, and I followed their pipe downstream to kind of see at what point it starts to upsize and where, potentially you could extend to get more capacity, and it's a long ways. It's a long ways, yeah. So, there's not it doesn't appear there's an immediate great option on Wichita's system to upsize that.
And is that pressurized at that point?
No,
Or
it's still gravity. It gravities all the way, so Kechi's flow ends up in their biggest pipe. It's 54 inch, it's on the east side of 135, and that runs down to plant 1, which is right at like hydraulic and 135. Yeah. So yeah, it gravities all the way from here to there. So yeah, that's the most important thing, and then we look at all the basins too individually, and so there's kind of a one downstream pipe of every basin, so then we come up with kind of the restriction of every individual basin. And so then we can evaluate each basin by itself, and then we look at those growth areas and look at the opportunity for those flow to go into one of those existing basins and see how much capacity is available. Which I believe is, the next slide.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
In looking at the map, so this is only our existing system and not with the future development
Correct.
included?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so there's the table that just shows the numbers. So estimated current peak wet weather flow is what we have calculated is in each basin. And then the design capacity and full flow capacity. So that KDHE on designing the amount of flow that's in a pipe, they want you to do it at 2/3 full. And they just want to continue to build into that. That's what the design capacity is how much flow that pipe can carry when it's 2/3 full. Reality is, you can get the full pipe flow without backing someone else. That's why we show 2. So we target the design flow. Reality is, there's a little bit of buffer there to get the full flow capacity. So you can see existing system, there's no concerns. Your highest flow, so basin 1 was very downstream pipe, 271 peak, and design capacity is 873. So there's plenty of capacity there. So again, at first glance, there is a lot of capacity left. It's just when you go back to the growth areas we're talking about and the fact that 320 residential acres right there triples the flow, that's where this capacity gets chewed up very quickly. So, all of your guys' determination or view of, what's needed for the future is very much dependent upon the goals of growth. So, this is a new slide of what we've looked at in the last couple of years after the master plan. So, I wanted to touch base on this. So, the most developer input we've had, or questions, have regarded area A and actually area E. And so we've had lots of questions the last couple of years. So we came up with the left photo there is more of a short-term option of how to serve A. And I'm going to get to the long-term stuff here in a little bit, but what to know is we came up with a concept of how could the city support and serve area A. I will note that what we show there can serve area A, nothing else. So that's the disadvantage of this, is that if we did this short-term option and then someone tried to develop in B, we could not support any other development. But we came up with that concept. That one hasn't really gone anywhere, but those were kind of put together so that the developer could have an idea of, and the city could have an idea of what that cost may be. But the important thing is kind of through that, we looked at that remaining capacity of the final pipe A, so based on that chart, and we related it to residential growth. And essentially, it's 321 acres, which is basically the same as what we had as our phase one possibility. One thing we looked at though is basins 2 and 3, which are the kind of the upper ones on the left. Neither one of them can support the entire flow of the 160 acres. So that concept we show, actually, you can see at the very bottom, it shows 2 connections. We're actually having to split the flow between the basins, so it can get through 2 and 3, and then basin 1 would have enough to support all of area A. That's 160 acres. Area E is also 160 acres, so if it all went residential, the system could support the growth of both of those areas. At the time, you'll note that we noted there's not enough capacity to support both. That's because E is noted as commercial growth originally, which is a higher assumed flow rate. Obviously, residential is what's going there now, so if it all would develop as residential, then there may be more options.
So you said that it had a higher flow rate if it's commercial than if it's fully developed as residential.
Yes, based on KDHE assumptions. I will say, and industrial's even higher, but it is very, very dependent upon the type of business. So like Bel Air has a bunch of warehouses going in their industrial park. They're very big buildings with relatively very low water use. So they're kind of nice developments as far as water and sewer goes, because they don't have a lot of demand, but they're still big employees, money generation. So it's hard to predict that. Again, that's why we use just what KDHE has for assumptions, but there's lots of variables to the commercial and industrial.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say residential tracks much cleaner and easier.
So on area A, a portion of it has been considered for residential. The secondary property is over a nursery, which I have no idea what they would be planning to do with that. So is there a max housing capacity in area A that could be supported? Like a number of households? Or is it just looking at total projected on that whole area?
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at total, but I will say the KDHE assumptions are assuming 10 people per acre, or essentially 3 houses per acre, so kind of third acre, but you do have, that's the other thing, some area gets taken up with streets, drainage ponds,
Right.
things like that. So, again, it can vary just depending on how the developer's trying to lay out the plat, whether it's duplexes, single family, I mean, all
Zero
that
lot line?
comes into play, yeah. So.
Thank you.
Okay, then the big picture sewer, so again, these are the sewer improvements that were developed to serve everything. So phase 2, big picture, we split the sewer system kind of in a west and east, and that's because around Rock Road, there's a natural grade break where east of Rock Road stuff wants to flow east, west of it will flow west. So since you're trying to, with sewer, generally maintain as many gravity lines as you can so you don't have to pump, it was a natural break point. For the west, we came up with 2 options. I'll tell you the first option doesn't necessarily work because of Wichita's restriction, but the option 1 was what gravity pipes would look like. So this included having to upsize the pipeline going to Wichita. What that would do in turn is it would cause Wichita to have to make improvements. And like I said, the feasibility of that, given how far we chased that line, seemed unlikely that would make sense from cost. And we never put an actual cost to it because it would be a big dollar amount. So, but that's kind of the idea here is really looking at the gravity options. Just to point out what I talked about versus the short term, you can see to serve both A and B, there's a whole new blue interceptor that routes all the way from the south end. That's what would be needed to serve both of those. Versus the short term it actually could serve one or the other. It can serve 160 acres. A's been the one that has had the most activity, so that evaluation was kind of done for it. E, that's, you know, having some development happen. We do have a proposed 12-inch on the west side. They're going right north of Rock Point, so they're trying to get as much into that existing sewer as they can. That's right there. At some point, there may have to be a 12-inch extension up, kind of to help serve the west side of E. Again, though, I will say, RE was done at the time with commercial, so it's a higher flow rate. So how that develops may lower that flow rate and may reduce or eliminate the need for that 12-inch, so.
So any development in A would add significant infrastructure to the needs of the city to put that blue pipeline?
If you wanted to install the infrastructure to allow A plus B or anything adjacent to it, then yes, it
Okay.
becomes very significant.
Okay.
If we came up with a short-term option of if you just wanted to survey and that was it, there was that shorter-term option.
Okay, so when you say short-term,
Well,
it's actually a permanent fix?
yes,
But,
yes.
okay,
yeah.
it's not like. oh,
Short-term in that it doesn't support the overall master plan
Okay.
growth, but yes, permanent, yeah. It would be, it's good clarification. It is a permanent solution, it just, yeah,
Just-
has a restriction, yes.
Okay.
Okay, and then option two, knowing that Wichita, like, has a capacity restriction, it was what is our other option then? So this basically proposed a treatment plant, a new treatment plant that all the flow would be taken to the treatment plant. So you can see there's much less pipe improvements kind of running north and south. Instead, we can kind of direct all of the new growth areas on the northwest, northeast side to a centralized location. We show it near the creek running through there. That's the low point. So trying to gravity flow to the low point is the natural way to do that. Have a treatment plant that then can discharge into the creek. Say that with lots of steps and hoops to go through to verify you can do that. But yes, that would be kind of the concept there for the west side.
So it isn't looking to reuse the water into the system, it's actually using it just to discharge it, to clean it and discharge it into
Yes.
the creek?
Yeah, yeah, not reuse. That's a whole nother
Yeah, I'm
topic.
sure it is. I just want clarification.
Yeah, I mean, reuse is becoming a very popular idea. The state is trying to push regulations to kind of get that set up. So, it's something to remember for the future, though, for sure.
So question, on that, if the city was to look that direction, does this option support all of the growth that's been put into this plan? So if you were to have the wastewater treatment plant, does this then,
So this is everything west of Rock,
okay,
and then here, the next one is everything east of Rock.
okay,
And again, we did that because of the natural way it flows. When we did the east side, when we did the map, we didn't identify the exact endpoint solution.
mhm,
So you can see it all going, and we call it proposed flow collection point. So essentially, fairly big gravity line picks up all those areas and flows it there.
mhm.
We did that at the time. There's multiple options. One, you could do a lift station and pump it all the way back. If you built a new plant on the west side, you could actually pump all that flow back to that plant, and that plant would be sized then to handle it all. At the time, we were working with Bel Air too. They had all the growth area too, right south of 254. They were in a similar issue that if all this growth happens, they would probably need a plant. And so there was a little bit of an idea of, maybe there could be a partnership there. Or it could be a separate treatment plant that would treat here and then dump to a different spot. Or potentially a different connection to Wichita. We kind of left all options on the table when we first did that. I think when we did our cost estimates though, we put in a cost, I believe, for an east treatment plant just to have something in there. But really there's multiple options with how you can do that. And yeah, you can technically build the treatment plant on the east side and actually put a lift station on the west. fit and different things like that, so.
Can I ask you a question really quick? Thomas, so if you had your options of what direction you would like to be considered, which of these options would you prefer to be looking at?
I would put the lift station west and pump east.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just it'd probably be, once you're pumping, it might just be cheaper to go all the way to wherever the plant would be. There is options where you pump it halfway and you get into a gravity line that's flowing east, but then the gravity line has to be bigger, and so there's a balance there, so, just, yeah, I mean, if we would get to that point in the future of looking at that, there'd probably be a whole nother feasibility study of more detail of how to actually do that, so. Okay, switching to the water system, so this slide, just shows the existing system. So Kechi has two connections to City of Wichita, one on Hillside, one on Rock. The one on Hillside comes from Wichita's lower pressure zone. So there's a booster pump station there that Kechi has that can boost that pressure up if needed. I will say if Wichita's pressure is high enough, it could just flow in. The Rock Road connection comes from Wichita's northeast pressure zone. It's a higher pressure. If I remember right, you're still operating the same, Thomas. Typically, that City of Wichita, the Rock Road one is open and typically supplying all the flow, and then the city is operating the booster pump station occasionally to kick water through that pipe. Is that still what you guys are doing?
That booster pump doesn't ever come on.
You're just opening the valve.
Naturally, yeah, it stays open. We did find out that, this last summer they changed the meters on the 16-inch line. We can't support the city on the 8-inch line. We kicked those boosters on and had to keep the pressure up above 20 PSI where they had that meter shut down, so we were watching flows on both sides of the city, and we were kicking it on, every now and then to make sure that we kept everything up. And
the Rock Road is higher pressure coming from Wichita, and then the supply line running from the connection up to the city is a bigger line. So the majority of the flow comes in from Rock. There is a Park City connection that's just used for emergencies. The last time you guys had that open. Yeah.
not that I've been here.
Okay. Obviously, there's the tower that's not in operation. It does look very pretty out here, but that won't be anymore. So that's the existing system. One thing to note that without a tower, and then there's not really a control valve, in essence, it's like the City of Kechi system is part of Wichita's system in a way. Hydraulically, it's like just an extension. There's not really much of a separation. So just real briefly talk about water model development. So to do this, we develop a computerized hydraulic model. We build the model using GIS data, represent all the pipes, valves, fire hydrants. We look at the pipe size, pumps, all of that gets put into that model. We put all the demands in the system. We put the top users in at their actual locations. We kind of distribute the rest of the demand to accurately represent the system's demand as best we can. We put in controls to mimic how the system actually operates. And at the time we came and did field flow testing. We came out, we flew fire hydrants, took pressure and flow readings. We utilized that to calibrate our model and make sure our model is as accurate a representation as we can of the actual system. So once we have the model, we evaluate it under steady state and extended period. Steady state is simply a point in time. So you basically say if the demand in the system is this at this instantaneous, the connections to Wichita have this pressure, what pressures would be in the system, what fire flows could we get. An EPS, extended period, actually runs the system for a week. We put in normal variations of demand. The demand peaks in the morning, peaks in the evening, follows people's typical water use. It mimics that, and it shows how the system reacts throughout the day. With that, and then we evaluate the pressures, fire flows, which available fire flows is the 20 PSI is the minimum KDHE, so everything has to be above that. So that tells us, in theory, how much fire department could get out of a fire hydrant without dropping the system. We look at water age, which is how long the water's been in the system, which directly relates to the chlorine residuals, which if it's in there too long, residuals drop, and then Thomas and his guys have to go flush water lines to keep them above one. So yeah, we looked at fire hydrant coverage too, which is physically where the hydrants are placed and how much area they cover. We did a pumping analysis, and we did a storage analysis. I think I have a couple more slides on that. But pumping analysis essentially looks at the ability for the system to pump water versus the demand, and you need to be able to pump your max day, because that's how much water you use during the day. So you got to be able to pump that. However, if you don't have a tower, then you also have to be able to pump the peak hour. Now, what's a little interesting about Kechi, we say pump. One connection has pumps, one doesn't. One has high enough pressure. So we looked at that for Kechi system, but the reality is you're really just supplying Wichita pressure to do that. Storage analysis, we look at the recommended amount of storage in the system. We look at three things. We look at what's called equalization volume, which is if your pumps or your supply was only providing max day, the towers would provide the additional volume to account for the very high hours of demand. They would make up that difference so that your pumps don't have to be able to pump that. That's what's called equalization. We look at fire flow, which is a volume that's available in case there's a fire that can be used. And then we look at emergency, which is if you lose your supply, your connection, how much water, like could you make it 8 hours with water still in the system? Obviously, guys, current storage is 0. So there's, when we obviously run these numbers, we show that there's storage recommended based on that. So kind of our conclusions, when we looked at the full phase 2 demand, there was really a supply volume issue coming from Wichita, and essentially it was the volume couldn't keep up with the demand at the pressures. So essentially we had to add pumps at the connections to pump that additional flow. Also, we would be pulling more volume, so that 3 million gallon a day average, and I think max day was like 5. Wichita would have to be able to supply that currently. So that's a strain on their system too that they would have to verify is that they can keep up. But that was the main thing we saw. With just the phase 1, we had recommendations, but the supply itself was not an issue for the 320 acres. The supply could keep up with that.
And that's for A.
It'd be
Oh, one or the other?
Yeah, combination up to 320 acres of residential. Yeah,
Okay.
it was really A and B at the time, but now I'm calling it more A and E just
Okay.
But yeah, otherwise, when we increased the supply, and I'll show you the recommendations, we really didn't see pressure issues, available fire flow issues. Like it was easily solvable as long as the supply was there. So here was my pumping system analysis. These are just the numbers. I kind of talked about it. So existing pumping only has 0.22. Max day projected is 5.2. So we show a really big need for pumping. Again, that would only be needed if Wichita's pressure can't keep up, but we do show with those future conditions that pressures do become an issue. But as soon as you have the pumps, you're okay. This was the system storage analysis, so these are numbers. You can see I had equalization, emergency, fire protection. The two right columns, we add the equalization to the fire protection, and then we add the equalization to the emergency. We don't add all three because it gets too conservative to assume all three of those things are needed at once. So we do either emergency or fire with equalization. And then usually we look at the higher of the two. So like for 2043, for reference, it'd be 2.5 is the higher of the two. And that's largely an emergency volume that's contributing to that. Whereas existing conditions, 2023 at the time, it was 0.4 was kind of what was needed. So with that, here was our recommendations, to the system. So the account for the additional pumping needs, we had noted to upsize the existing pump station and then to, install a new pump station at the Rock Road. Again, both of those are only really needed for scenario two, the long-term growth for just the 320 acres. The pump upgrades would not be needed. We did have a flow control valve at Rock Road. We did recommend that with phase one. What that starts to do is allow you to hydraulically separate from Wichita's system a little more. And then with that, we show a proposed half a million gallon tower. And we basically show it adjacent to the existing, but it'd be where we could find land. And essentially that flow control valve would start to open and close based on the level of the tower. Instead of it being a constant feed from Wichita, it would just open and close. And so it starts to hydraulically separate you from Wichita's system. Tower again would provide for emergency volume, fire volume, equalization. The blue lines, they represented pipe loops that we recommended for phase one. Again, at the time, phase one was areas A and B, so it's kind of top left there, so those are really needed to support that. Now knowing that property E, the more likely loop may actually be between Woodlawn and Rock to be done first. But yeah, I mean, eventually connecting back to Oliver and creating those nice loops would be recommended. And then to the east from there, it's just more big 12-inch loops to serve the growth, potential growth out east. And then there's another 2 million gallon water tower recommended with all that growth out there. And again, that growth is 2 million out there, 500,000 existing, because the 2 million really supporting that idea of that future commercial and industrial growth. Any questions on that?
So is there any change in looking at those when there's kind of this phase one was for one area, phase two was for another, and now they're sort of this split off?
Yeah, so for like I said, for the water, the only thing what likely is gonna happen, this loop right here is gonna become more important with phase one, because as the development continues at the west side of Rock, it's gonna become more and more important to try to loop that back around. So creating that loop may actually become a higher priority, so.
Okay.
And just, yeah, the longer you develop without creating a loop, that's when you start to see drops in pressure and fire flows. It also makes the system a little more vulnerable to like a pipe break, cutting water off entirely to someone. You have 2 feeds to every development, makes you a lot more resilient against pipe breaks, so.
So is there more of a challenge of kind of picking that middle place to start than starting on either side?
Yeah, I mean, the extension of the mains kind of has to go with development, and a lot of times you can kind of get developers to partially pay for that or pay for it as they develop, because it kind of becomes part of their system too. There's lots of ways cities do that, whether it's in lieu of fees or Wichita has basically a fee where they build the arterials ahead of time and then they back expense that to the developers later. But yeah, there's a lot of options to pay for that, and that may dictate how you build it. Most cities kind of build it with the development. Like I said, you can't build too far because you create an issue before you get the loop back around. And then yeah, the recommendation for the tower, like I said, was 0 storage now. If you ask us, it's build it now, but with 2 connections to Wichita, you have a little resilience there. I mean, you have decent pressures from them, so it's not like that prevents your system from operating or anything, but just to get that additional resiliency.
So what I hear you say then is that if you're looking at that middle section, is that the consideration of building the 2 million gallon water tower?
No, that would
Or are you
play.
talking about the half?
That would play more in with the half.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're talking about more about the 500,000.
Correct,
Okay.
yes, yeah. Yeah, and we found, well, partly because we put two, you know, maybe the tower actually ends up on Woodlawn or something, you know, there's options there too of where it is. When we looked at the full growth in two, it made sense to put it on Oliver, right,
Okay.
to support the existing part of town in the west end, and then you have the east end. You know, if the goals change and the you know, the east side just really isn't in the cards or something, maybe it makes more sense to put the tower in Woodlawn and serve more like one tower for the system.
Okay.
So yeah, again, that's where the goals of growth really affect kind of the outcome of what you build. I think that was it. I mean, the costs are there from 2 years ago. Again, they're very, very high because they're the full-blown serve
Right.
everything. So, you know, lots of costs there, but you know, the reality is you would gradually try to do them. The hardest part with wastewater, is when you build a plant, you gotta build the plant. And so you can phase components inside the plant to allow for expansion so that you don't necessarily have to build it for the full capacity, but you still have to provide all the footprint, you know, it's still a pretty big expense. So that's the most challenging thing to any of this is when and how to pull the trigger on that.
So question on that, it's, with the sort of portions, do we have the ability to have some cost estimates for looking at a certain portions of it right now?
Yeah, so the water's easier. So the water, because it can be built more segmentally than the sewer can. So the water's pretty, and we actually had the scenario on phase one of the water broken out there. But yeah, the water's fairly easy to say, oh, let's put a half mile in, what's that cost, or so be it. Like I said, the sewer's just harder because once you build the plant, you gotta do the plant, and then you gotta do all the gravity lines to get there. And if you're trying to build the plant, like at the ultimate, like say it was the very southeast, but your first development is farthest west
Yes.
of what would serve there, well, the unfortunate thing is you have to build it all at once. If your first development was right next to the plant, then you could build the plant in a very short section of gravity sewer and not have to build it all. So that's the hard part too, is it's very dependent on where the development happens.
Any other questions? Anything we'd like to see going forward in this, regarding this specific information? Okay,
So, okay, I just was, like I said, taking it in, so the pipe looping, that 12-inch, that's that first one there on.
Yeah, so that would be,
Table 7.2, that's the one that you're recommending first.
yeah, that would represent the blue, so now I've kind of changed the potential location, but the cost of that, I mean, you can see the length of those is pretty similar to the blue versus if you took the blue and the red. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
that would,
It's a little bit, okay.
yeah.
And I know you said that these were from 2 years ago.
Mhm.
What have you seen in pricing? Is it still gonna be, is there a significant change from what we saw 2 years ago? Is it
So,
about the same?
We try to be pretty conservative at the master plan level for these, so I would think
Okay.
these are still good.
So for, okay.
Everything keeps going up, so.
But yeah, well, I just didn't know
Yeah.
if you've seen a significant price increase in the
No,
last 2 years? or
Just normal
just normal
inflation,
inflation,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. We'll say in the Wichita market specifically with pipe contractors, the last 20 years contractors are definitely busy, and so you got new name contractors coming in, those prices were going up, those guys are coming in and bringing them back down, which is helpful. They're also new, so they have some challenges too, so. Appreciate
I
it,
would,
guys.
thank you. I entertain a motion to adjourn the workshop.
I move we adjourn the workshop.
Motion by Councilmember Moreland, second by Councilmember Hedstrom. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0. We are adjourned until 7 o'clock for the meeting. Thank you again, Trevor.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate it. Oh, nice.
Probably wasn't fine to do that, but the cost of it, like,
One time a week.
Yeah. What was the cost of that one on there? I didn't see it. Did-
No.
Everybody did this.
Well, that's wastewater, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, sometimes it's, I don't know. I think people's hearts are involved instead of sort of, you know, what should happen.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no small thing, but residential tripled the town, I mean, that's not. That's gold by any means.
Well, it's definitely not something that, is, not happening. If you guys put it off for so long, but now we're starting to see, they're doing what they're doing.
Hi, Frank. How are ya? Good to see you. Thanks for coming tonight. Appreciate it. Don't know if there'll be questions or not, but it'd be good to have you here. So, yeah, appreciate it. So, yeah, I'll probably just introduce you and then I'll just let you say a few words and we can ask anybody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I told them that, you weren't exactly sure the years that you served on the planning commission, because I wanted to change, but you didn't. When the time comes, so.
I think I wrote down some pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all good with me, so.
Yeah, when I went to work for American Airlines, that's why I had to leave here,
That's my
because I
figured.
work in Tulsa. So
Yeah,
that day I know.
it's on there, it's on there.
The day I started, I'm not real sure.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. That's totally fine, so it's all good.
Okay.
Anyway, thanks for coming again.
You bet.
Hi, I'm Johnny. Haven't met you before. I don't think so.
Probably in the park, probably.
Probably.